Hi there, my name is Wendy. Thanks for tuning in. We are talking about parental alienation today. Parental alienation is a pandemic that is sweeping across our nation from city to city, province to province, state to state, to country. Nobody is immune from parental alienation. We are going to take an inside look at the world of parental alienation, show the effects and the trauma it causes, as well as all the different types of personality disorders that are associated with parental alienation. I use the word parental alienation very loosely because it affects the entire family. I feel it is family alienation, which better describes the situation because it's not just the parents that are being affected, it's the whole side of that family that's being affected. We're going to talk about CPS and how they play the role in parental alienation, as well as other figures like doctors, lawyers, and other upstanding citizens of the community who are supposed to be upholding the law, but instead they break it themselves. CPS is $1 billion a year organization. The way they make their money is through us, from taxpayers. Through they get their funding from the school, which we pay the school taxes. So essentially, we are paying to have our own children taken away. I am an alienated parent. I am an alienated grandparent. I am an alienated sibling. I am an alienated daughter. I am an alienated cousin. I am an alienated niece. These are the dynamics of parental alienation. And I say that to show how everybody, no matter what your title is in your family, everybody can be affected by parental alienation. I'm going to share my story with you and show you all the signs that I missed when I started going through this that I wish I had have known. Starting off with the mental disorders of an alienating parent. Now, it's important to understand the difference between estrangement and alienation. Estrangement is when there's a divide between the parent and the child, and the parent is responsible for that divide, whether they were abusive or physically, verbally, sexually, what have you. If they were abusive to that child, the child can hold resentment. That is called estrangement. That means the parent is responsible for their own demise and their own breakdown in that relationship. Whereas alienation is completely opposite. There is no justification for the behavior between the child and the parent. The child will say things that have never happened and essentially has been brainwashed by the other parent to believe that their target parent is no good and not in their best interest. And it's important to understand the different types of personality disorders and how these are created and how to dive into the mind of people so that we can sometimes think like them because sometimes it helps. And most of these disorders are stemming from childhood trauma that has not been adequately dealt with. I am a child survivor of childhood trauma. I am a child of CPS. Borderline personality disorder is a distorted self-image, impulsiveness, unstable and intense relationships, and extreme emotions. Generally have a fear of abandonment and will go to extreme lengths to prevent real or imagined abandonment. Lose contact with reality, engage in self-harming behaviors, suicide threats or attempts, engage in risky behaviors, unable to maintain positive relationships. That is the borderline personality disorder. The narcissistic personality disorder is an inflated sense of their own self importance. They have a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, lack of empathy for others, and extreme feeling of jealousy. an expectation of special treatment, exaggerating importance, extreme sensitivity to be easily hurt, to feel rejected with little provocation, and difficulty in maintaining healthy relationships. So you'll notice in both of them, they both have difficulties maintaining positive relationships. On one hand, they are terrified of abandonment, but they also have an extreme um, self worth about themselves and need that attention and admiration. Now, a narcissistic personality disorder, it's important to note there's two different types. There's a covert narcissist and there's an overt narcissist. Now, the covert narcissist is harder to detect because they're more of an introvert. So they will sit back and watch the room, and sometimes they can get overlooked in the crowd. Whereas an overt narcissist is easy to spot. They're standing up, they're center of attention, and they're working the room. Now, the brain continues to develop until they're 25 years old. So, when a child is very young, their brain is like a sponge. It maintains all this information and does not spit anything out. So anything an alienated parent is telling the child, it sticks and it doesn't leave. And a child can be very easily persuaded to lie, tell stories, and say things that are not true, especially when she's being rewarded. Because there's always a payoff to the situation, and the child is usually always rewarded with something. There's a payoff for the child to continue on like that. And unfortunately, it creates serious mental health issues with our children as well. So, the brain continues to develop until the age of 25. There are three main parts of the brain: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And three other names for it is the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. This is the part that interprets touch, vision, hearing, speech, reasoning, emotions, learning, fine control, and movement. And it's separated into two halves, the left and the right hemisphere. And they transmit messages back and forth to each other. So if a stroke victim was to have a stroke on the right side, he's going to feel numbness and tingling in his left arm, because it works in the opposite effect. The cerebrum has four parts to it: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. And there's fibers which transmit these messages back and forth to each other. And when those fibers are not working or not active as far as quickly as they should be, or to the highest point that they should be, then you have all these other situations where it's personality, behavior, emotions, judgment, planning, and problem solving. Those are all the things that we use our frontal lobe for. And it's also emotions, which it's very impulsive. They are unable to control their emotions. So if somebody who doesn't have this disorder is having a disagreement with a family member or whatever, they have the capabilities to be able to sit down, talk, and discuss the matter. Whereas a person who has these problems of the narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder does not have the capabilities of sitting down and talking in a calm, rational manner. It's like they react first before they think. And now, one of the personality disorders that our children are being affected by is the oppositional defiance disorder. And that is uncooperative, defiant, and hostile towards peers, parents, teachers, and other authority figures. A large number of children that are on the autism spectrum exhibit signs of ODD, which short form spells odd, which it is. It's very odd behavior. So those are the personality disorders, and those are just with the alienating party. The next segment, we're going to get into the personality disorders and the trauma bonding that affects parents, family members, and the children. And I will start sharing my story with you, and we will take an inside look to all the people that have affected the alienation in my case. And again, like I said, it's not an isolated case. It's a pandemic that's happening worldwide. But it's very important, I think, to understand how somebody's mind works in order to find the solutions. And I'm not going to, like, the psychologists, I find, put too much of a spin on it. It's very hard for, like, just us regular people to understand what they're talking about half the time. They say that you shouldn't be going into court and talking about parental alienation because parental alienation does not exist. Well, later on in my other segments, I will be showing you the evidence, the reports, and showing you that it does exist and it needs to be recognized in the family court system. Um, and so they also say it's very hard to prove. Well, if you have a child who's verifying that it's happened, it's very hard for a civilian to understand how you cannot prove it when there's so much evidence that can prove it. They just have decided not to look for it. And they don't want to look for it. The one thing about CPS as well is in many situations they have the ability to make a child disappear. So, in other words, if you have two children living under your roof, but one of them who is alienated goes to them and says that they were removed from my home by CAS, then the other one is not approached by CAS, are not talked to by CAS, are not interviewed by CAS. They only go by what the alienated child says. It's $1 billion a year market. And the reason why they don't want to talk to our non-alienated children is because they don't want to talk to anybody who will support the target parent, because then they can't make money if they can't put a child into care. I will also show you evidence of how the city asked me to pay child support for my child, who is 15 years old, that they were trying to put her into an apartment of her own. She did not have a permission to live on her own, and I told them so. There's so much to cover in parental alienation. It's like a domino effect, and there's no way to ever cover it in one segment. So we will continue to have more and more segments that are all about education, and it's trying to get the public to know and the city to know that we're not going to stand for it anymore. Parental alienation has to stop. Our children have to stop being affected by parental alienation. And even our alienated children have been harmed in so many ways. But the non-alienated children have been harmed in many ways as well. And it's important not to forget them, because even though they're not alienated from us, they are alienated from the rest of the family. And you have to remember, going through a divorce is hard enough on us. Your children are going through it twice as hard. So the next segment, we're going to start having an inside look at the corruption within the family court system and the corruption within CAS. And also talk more about the health effects that it's doing to our children. So stay tuned for my next segment. Hopefully I should be getting it produced next week. And I'd love to hear your comments. You can reach me at my Facebook group, which is Alienated Parent and Grandparent Peer Support Group.com in Canada. Sorry, it's parents and alienated parents and grandparents peer support group in Canada. I'd love to hear your comments about these videos and any others that are produced. I do have a few on YouTube, so feel free to look at them and give me your feedback, because, you know, if you have something that hasn't been tried, any answers, any questions, I'm all ears. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.